Welcome, my name is Jerry Sunerine, and today we're going to be looking at how can we solve problems involving graphs. In today's lesson, we're going to look specifically at bar graphs and the importance of how bar graphs will help students look at data, visualize the information, take information from the graph in order to solve problems and to get information. Before we get into looking at bar graphs, we're going to be looking at pieces of the bar graphs that we want students to understand. When looking at a bar graph, we want them to look at the title. All bar graphs need a title to explain what data is being shown. Sometimes in the bar graph, we have something that's called a key, which is the bar charts with more than one bar for each section will need a key so it's clear that each bar refers to. So in this example, we have boys and girls, and we see that they're in two different colors so that it's easily identifiable what we're looking at in this example. Here are the actual bars. While this seems like stating the obvious, your bar graph needs accurately drawn bars that are all the same width. Notice how all the bars are uniform, and we want to emphasize that with our students. Sometimes if they're drawing it on their own, they might draw it on different pieces or different sizes, which with different widths, which could be problematic. And we want students to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. So utilizing a graph paper could be helpful in this process. The next step is the bar labels. Each bar must have it clearly labeled. So here we look at different sports. So we see that each section here we have football, hockey, rugby, and other. So we see that it's specific. So if we need to find information regarding rugby, we can go straight here and get that information. Or if we need to get hockey, we go from here. The next thing, what we're going to be looking at is the horizontal axis title. All bar charts need the title along the axis to describe what the information along this axis relates to. And the same thing goes for the vertical axis title. This is important to help us understand the x-axis and the y-axis also. And the last piece, which is very important, is the numbered scale. The axis must be numbered with a sensible scale. The numbers can go up by ones, twos, five, tens, etc., depending on what is appropriate for the data. In this example, we see that it's going up by twos from 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, which these numbers are clearly labeled. However, there are numbers in between. So each line is 1. So like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So figuring out the numbered scale are important for students to identify how they need to count by in order to answer the question. For the purposes of this lesson, we're going to use this example here. This is a graph, birthday of students by month, and we see that the axes are clearly labeled, months, and number of students. We see the months are labeled on the bottom, January, February, March, April, May, June, and so on. We see the bars are uniform, they have the same width, and they're different colors to help us out. And we see that the scale is going up by 2. We also want students to understand that sometimes that here, like if we look at April, it falls between 2 and 4. So we want them to understand that the number between 2 and 4 is 3. Be a little challenging, so helping students with this misconception is going to be very important. This can be a great activity that you as teachers can do with students by doing birthday of students by month. You can find out what students are interested in, like such as food, popular games, different hobbies, activities, to not only get to know your students, but to also build relationships with them. Now we're going to look at some questions relating to this graph. so we can help our students to figure out how to manipulate the graph, collect information in order to answer it. So here are some examples, and we want to make sure that base your answers on the provided graph. Here are some example questions we can ask them, and these are very straightforward, so we want students to get used to extracting information from the graph, such as what is the scale of the graph? So we want them to identify where to locate the number and how much is the graph going up by. Which month has the most birthdays? And we want students to look at the graph, find that information, and document and write it down. And the same thing, which month has the least birthdays? Here we want them to also look at the graph and figure out where can they get that information and explain it. Next slide is going over some of the answers. In red, I provided the answers here, and I also we might need to reword the question so that students might be able to understand it better. So instead of, for example, the first one, what is the scale of the graph? The graph is going up by 2. So we want students to identify that. In the second and third question, we might need to reword it. So for example, which month has the most birthdays? If they're having trouble locating that, we can say which one is the tallest bar and make the association of most birthdays with the tallest bar. Here we see that June is the tallest bar, and that would be our answer here. Same thing we can say about which month has the least birthdays, and we see that. And in case if they're having trouble, we could say like least birthdays means the shortest bar. And then we can collect that information from here, and we see that it's August. Next, we're going to use 2 follow-up questions, which requires a little bit of math calculation. First question is, how many more birthdays are in May compared to March? How many more birthdays are in June compared to April? For these 2 types of questions, when we want to have students understand that how many more means subtraction. So, and then we want them to understand, let's locate where May is, where March is, and from here, collect those 2 numbers. And since it says how many more, we want them to subtract those 2 numbers to get our answer. And we want them to write a complete sentence. Same thing for the second question here. So the next slide is going to go over how to work through and write a reasonable response. So here we see that in May we have 8, and March we have 2. So we do 8 minus 2 gives us 6. There are 6 more birthdays in May compared to March. And then the same thing for the bottom question. The bottom question might be a little difficult because we're looking at June and April. June has 10. April is in between 2 and 4, so we want them to identify that between 2 and 4 is 3. So here we have 10 minus 3 is 7. There are 7 more birthdays in June compared to April. Lastly, we're going to go into summarization. And in looking at how can we solve problems involving graphs, we want students to look and understand all parts of the graph before answering questions related to the graph. We want them to make sense of what the graph is talking about using all information provided. And also look at the scale. Here are examples of looking at scales. Here we see the scale is going up by 2. Here we see the scale is going up by 5s. And here we see the scale is going up by 1s. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you, and have a great day.